My wife Clara stood over my bed and laughed while whispering to her young lover about how my lungs would finally stop working before the property taxes on our estate were even due. She held a vial of digitalis meant to mimic a heart condition, eyeing my $4 million retirement account and the deed to our sprawling glass-walled home on the cliffs of Lake Michigan. They thought I was a dying old man with no witnesses, but they forgot about the man who owed me his life and the recording device hidden inside my oxygen machine. My name is Mark Whitaker. I'm 65 years old, and I spent 4 decades designing the skyline of Chicago before retiring to what I foolishly believed was a peaceful life of luxury. We lived in a custom-built home in Lake Forest, a place I designed with every detail meant to honor the 30 years of marriage I thought Clara and I had built together. I had retired as a senior partner from one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the Midwest, leaving behind a legacy of steel and glass that I hoped would sustain us. My health had always been robust until 6 months ago, when I suddenly began experiencing dizzy spells, heart palpitations, and a terrifying weakness that left me confined to our master bedroom suite. Clara was always there with a glass of water and a sympathetic smile, playing the role of the devoted wife while she slowly introduced the poison that was meant to end me. She brought in a young fitness trainer named Julian, claiming he was there to help with my physical therapy, but I soon realized their sessions involved more than just exercise and stretching. I lay in that bed for weeks, watching them through half-closed eyes as they moved through my house like they already owned the furniture, the art, and the very air I breathed. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest, heavier than the illness, as I realized the woman I loved was counting down the seconds until my heart finally gave out. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I overheard them in the hallway discussing the dosage of my medication and how much longer they would have to wait before they could file the death certificate. Julian complained about the smell of the sick room, and Clara laughed, promising him that once I was gone, they would burn the mattress and renovate the entire wing with my insurance money. I felt a cold rage ignite in my gut, a spark of the man who had managed billion-dollar construction projects and stared down the toughest city inspectors in the state of Illinois. I realized I couldn't go to the police yet because Clara had spent months carefully documenting my decline, making it look like a natural progression of a terminal and undiagnosed heart condition. I needed an ally, someone outside our social circle who wouldn't be bought by Clara's charm or her crocodile tears, and that was when I remembered a young man named David. 20 years ago, I had found David working 3 jobs as a mechanic to pay for trade school, and I had quietly paid his entire tuition because I saw a spark in him. I managed to reach my old burner phone hidden in my drafting desk, sending a single cryptic message to the only person I knew I could trust with my life and my secret. David arrived at the house under the guise of a furnace repairman, and in the few minutes Clara left us alone, I told him everything about the poison and the plan to kill. He slipped me a small recording device and a bottle of clean water, promising to wait in the shadows of the ravine behind our property until I gave him the signal to move. That night, Clara told me we were going to see a specialist in the city, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl as she helped me into the car. As we drove along the rain-slicked curves of the Sheridan Road, she suddenly veered toward the edge of the cliff, and I realized this was not a doctor's visit but an execution. The car tumbled down the embankment, flipping twice before crashing into the thick underbrush of the ravine, the sound of twisting metal echoing through the silent, dark woods of Lake Forest. I felt the hot sting of blood on my face and the crush of the dashboard against my legs, but I forced myself to stay still as Clara crawled out of the wreckage. She didn't check my pulse or try to pull me free. She simply stood there in the rain, adjusted her coat, and walked back up to the road where Julian was waiting. I watched their silhouettes disappear into the night, leaving me to burn or bleed out in the shadows of the very forest where I had once taken our children to hunt for mushrooms. David was there within seconds, his strong hands prying the door open and pulling me from the twisted steel just as the engine compartment began to hiss with white, acrid smoke. He carried me to his old tow truck hidden deep in the trees and drove me to a small, private garage on the outskirts of the city where no one would ever look. For 3 weeks, I recovered in a windowless room above the shop, my body healing while David brought me news of the frantic search for my body and Clara's public mourning. She put on a masterful performance for the local news, weeping about the tragic accident and the loss of her brilliant husband, while Julian moved into my study and drank my scotch. My old attorney and friend, Arthur, was the next person I contacted, and the look of shock on his face when he saw me alive was something I will never forget. Arthur told me that Clara had already initiated the probate process, claiming that I was dead and that she was the sole beneficiary of my entire estate and the architectural firm. We spent long nights looking over my will and the trust documents, realizing that Clara had forged several amendments that would have given her total control over my life's work. I watched through a hidden camera David installed in the house as they threw away my sketches, my models, and the photos of my parents, treating my life like yesterday's trash. Julian was already picking out a new Ferrari, using the credit cards I had worked decades to keep in good standing, while Clara planned a massive inheritance party at our home. She invited the entire board of my former firm, the local politicians, and all our wealthy neighbors, intending to use the event to cement her status as the grieving, wealthy widow. I spent those weeks strengthening my body and refining the evidence, making sure every recording of their poison talk and every forged document was backed up in multiple secure locations. David found the mechanic who had tampered with the brakes on my car, a man Julian had bribed with $10,000 to ensure the accident would be fatal and final. We secured a confession from the mechanic on video, adding another layer of steel to the trap we were building around the woman who thought she had already won the game. On the night of the party, the house was glowing with light, and the sound of expensive jazz drifted over the lawn where I had once spent summers planting hydrangeas with Clara. I arrived at the gates in David's tow truck, wearing a dark suit and a medical mask, blending in with the catering staff as they moved crates of champagne into the kitchen. Arthur was already inside, acting as a guest, holding a briefcase that contained the original will and the arrest warrants that the local district attorney had signed just an hour before. Clara stood at the top of the grand staircase in a black designer gown, raising a glass of vintage Cristal to the crowd as she began a speech about my legacy. She spoke about my vision, my kindness, and how much she missed the sound of my voice, all while Julian stood behind her, a smug smile plastered across his young, arrogant face. I stepped into the center of the ballroom, pulling the mask from my face and standing under the chandelier I had imported from Italy for our 25th wedding anniversary 3 years ago. The silence that fell over the room was deafening, a vacuum of sound as 100 guests stared at the man they believed had been dead and buried for nearly a month. Clara's glass shattered on the marble floor, the champagne spraying her shoes as her face turned a ghostly shade of gray that matched the silk of her expensive morning gown. I didn't scream or shout. I simply walked toward her, the sound of my shoes on the stone the only noise in the room as I held up the recording device. I pressed play, and the entire ballroom heard her voice discussing the digitalis and the way she planned to burn the mattress once I was finally out of the way for good. The local sheriff, a man I had known for 20 years, stepped out from the library and placed the handcuffs on Clara's wrists before she could even find the breath to scream. Julian tried to run through the terrace doors, but David was waiting there, blocking his path with a silent, immovable presence that ended the young man's dreams of a Ferrari. As they were led away in the back of the patrol cars, I stood on my balcony and looked out at the lake, feeling the cold wind on my face for the first time. I realized that architecture wasn't just about building structures of steel and stone, but about creating a foundation of truth that could withstand even the most violent and unexpected of storms. I gave David a partnership in a new logistics company I funded, and I moved into a smaller apartment in the city, leaving the glass house on the cliff behind me forever. Arthur helped me set up a foundation for struggling trade students, ensuring that the wealth I earned would help builders like David instead of destroyers like Clara and her young lover. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling the phantom weight of the poison in my veins, but then I remember the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut. I am 66 now, and while my heart still flutters occasionally from the damage the Digitalis did, I have never felt more alive or more certain of the man I am. The skyline I helped build still stands tall against the Chicago wind, a reminder that some things are meant to last, while others are built on sand and destined to wash away. I learned that betrayal is a lesson in perspective, showing you who truly stands by you when the lights go out and the walls you built begin to crumble around your feet. I sit in my small garden now, watching the sun set over the city, and for the first time in 30 years, I don't have to look over my shoulder or wonder. The truth is a heavy thing to carry, but once you set it down in front of the world, it becomes the very ground you walk on as you head toward peace. My name is Mark Whitaker, and I survived the woman who tried to steal my life, only to find that the life I have now is the only one worth living. I am finally at rest, surrounded by the simple things that money can't buy, like the loyalty of a friend and the quiet dignity of a man who stood his ground.